NOMAD ecosystem, and today's speaker is Lauri Himanen. He serves as a technical coordinator in the FAIRmat consortium, overseeing the development of the digital infrastructure behind NOMAD. He also has a research background in computational physics, machine learning, and materials informatics. Welcome, Lauri. I'm really happy to hand over to you.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. So, hello from my side as well. And as mentioned, we're going to be talking today about the NOMAD ecosystem. And let's take a brief overview of the contents of my slides. So we'll first start out with basically going over what is FAIRmat, the organization I'm working under, and what is NOMAD and what's the relationship. Then we're gonna take a look at the difference between what is NOMAD Central and versus what is a NOMAD Oasis. And then we're gonna be taking a look at the different components of what we call the NOMAD ecosystem. And we'll also be looking into a few tips and resources for how would you get started as a NOMAD Oasis administrator. And the last slides will be about how to get involved with our community. So let's get started with FAIRmat and NOMAD. And in short, FAIRmat is building a fair data infrastructure for condensed matter physics and the chemical physics of solids under the NFDI. We have a centralized hub in the Center for the Science of Materials, Berlin, where we have roughly 30 co-located co-workers. So we really work together in a tight team. And of course, then there are several PIs working at different universities all over Germany. And we organize our work into 7 different areas. We have area A for synthesis, B for experiment, C for computation, D for infrastructure, and this is the area that I'm leading. Then we have use cases, training, and coordination. And the NOMAD is essentially our product. So we are developing this open source free material science data platform for everyone. And this platform is built to support the complete data lifecycle, starting from simply digitizing your data all the way to advanced analysis with AI. So we would really try to capture the whole life cycle of your data. And basically, this typically starts with just storing your data. So it's about organizing your files and folders and so on. But we go, of course, much beyond this. We are all about structuring your data. So in NOMAD, you typically define schemas and build parsers that map your data into these schemas. And we also support electronic lab notebooks to capture kind of rich standardized metadata. Then we have several different components for analyzing your data. So one aspect of this is just finding this data. So search and exploring the data needs to be efficient. We also have remote tools for analysis and also ways to basically run reproducible automated data processing pipelines as well. We will take a look at all of these components a bit later. And of course, once you have built your data pipelines, have created your data, then you also need to share your data. So we have mechanisms for collaborating with individuals, groups, exposing this data through an API, and then also publishing your data with a DOI. So basically, NOMAD is our core product that we are developing. And now I'm going to talk about different types of deployments of NOMAD, because NOMAD is not just one thing. We have multiple kind of things you can do with it. And one of the things that we do is we host one NOMAD deployment ourselves. So at nomad-labs.eu is our basically instance that FAIRmat operates. And this one is free for anyone. So you can create an account there for free. You can also connect there with an Helmholtz AI. And here you can upload, organize, publish your data, get DOIs. All of the data is published under CC by 4. So this is reusable for anyone. So basically um, goes well along with the FAIR principles. We have some quota limits for how many private uploads you can have, but essentially there's no limit for how many uploads you can have in there at the moment. And this is indeed hosted and maintained and updated by the FAIRmat team. And in one form or another, this has been already in operation since 2014. There were previous projects under where we were hosting this service, but then since 2021, the service has been basically under the FAIRmat consortium. And we are one of the officially recommended repositories for material science by Springer Nature. And just like to give you like a rough idea of what kind of data and how much we have, this data is that we're well over 100 terabytes of data in there. Then there are almost 20 million in what we call entries. You will soon learn what that means. We support more than 60 file formats to be parsed, and we have more than 6,000 registered users at the moment. So that was our centrally hosted service. And then you have another way to work with NOMAD, which is a NOMAD Oasis. And this is now something you can host yourself. So it's a self-hosted NOMAD deployment, typically for maybe your research group, for your institution, for a certain scientific project. And in this way, you basically have a full control over the hosting, access, retention, customization of a NOMAD Oasis. And essentially, you can run it on your laptop to get started, to kind of develop your deployment. But then you usually, of course, then try to push it to some sort of on-premise server or even to the cloud with Kubernetes. I will later show a bit of more about this or different options. Then you can connect your own institution single sign-in service to your Oasis for institutional login. And these deployments are essentially shipped as Git versioned repositories, essentially, which makes it very easy to work together on creating this kind of a deployment, and you can create very easily reproducible deployments as well. Then you have also the possibility to basically create a kind of a federated network. So you may connect multiple Oases together and push data from them into, for example, the central deployment as well. So there's this federation aspect to this as well. Essentially, like a NOMAD Oasis runs the exact same software as our central does, but then you add your own plugins on top of it to kind of customize it for yourself. And we have more than 80 Oases already registered worldwide. Here you can see, although the image is a bit small, a map of the different Oasis locations that we have at the moment. So, of course, there's like a uh, tight cluster here in Europe, but we also have a few in the States and also in Asia. So we are getting quite quick adoption on this. And just to summarize the differences between our centrally hosted service versus an Oasis. So essentially, the target audience for central Oasis is individual researchers, um, essentially because it's free and accessible to anyone. So typically, it's individual researchers who submit data there. Whereas in an Oasis, typically this is something that you build for your research project, your institution. On the hosting side, in the Nomad Central, we do it. We run the whole service ourselves, so you don't need to worry about it. On an Oasis, this now runs on your infrastructure. You have full control over this. With regards to data control, so on the central Oasis, essentially when you publish your data, it's publicly available for everyone, and this is what fairness is all about. So getting access to the data, sharing your research data this is what the central Nomad is all about. And then on an Oasis, you have local control. You can for example, not expose your Oasis to the public internet. You can have white lists of users who can get access to it. You can control very granularly on what sort of access different people have there. And cost-wise, Nomad Central is free, as mentioned. And on an Oasis, now it depends on your hosting solutions and admin efforts, but this is basically something that's on you if you are having your own deployment. And with regards to customization, so on our central service, we have a quite fixed set of common schemas and plugins that we run there. Sometimes they evolve and we add new ones, but it's not nearly as customizable as an Oasis where you can freely control what sort of things you install there. So there on an Oasis, you get much more flexibility with respect to this. And I would say that you don't need to pick one or the other. The common pattern is this kind of hybrid approach. So for example, your research project might install an Oasis to do their day-to-day work. And once the project evolves and matures and your data is kind of getting polished, you can then later decide, okay, now this is something that I want to send to the central deployment to get visibility and share your data with everyone. So that's basically about what is our central deployment and what is a Nomad Oasis. And now we can take a look at the basically different parts of what we call the Nomad ecosystem. So an individual Nomad deployment consists of different kind of tools that you combine together, and we'll shortly go over the kind of different building blocks of a Nomad deployment. So we really want to capture like varying levels of sophistication for research data management. So starting from the very basics of just digitizing your data and extending all the way to really complex AI analysis of the data and remote tools running on your data. But to do this kind of wide spectrum of different research data management approaches, we need to have certain building blocks, and I will briefly go over them here. We'll take a more in-depth look into them a bit later. So the first building block is essentially just the raw data. So you start by just sending your files and folders to the server to get started with digitization. And as I mentioned, like Nomad is all about structuring your data. So then in Nomad, you have schemas which define the structure of your data and entries that then basically follow some schema and are extracted from your data. And we will take a look at what this means in just a second. Then there are parsers and electronic lab notebooks. So these kind of entries can be created either with parsers or ELNs. We will also have a look at this, what this means. Then we have what are called apps, which are effectively our solution for searching through a large collection of data that you might have on your Oasis. I think this is an important part of the data management is being able to find the data that you're interested in this. So the apps are all about this. Then we have remote tools, which are essentially about when you have your data on an Oasis and you wanna analyze it, and depending on how large your data is and what sort of software you need, these kind of remote tools are sometimes very useful for doing this kind of on-site analysis with browser-based tools. So this is what we'll also take a look at a bit later. And then we also have actions, which are kind of durable, well-defined data workflows that might have access, for example, to GPU resources to run AI workflows on your data. And we will take a look at all of these different components in a few minutes, but I want to emphasize that essentially these are the building blocks, but you decide how you want to mix and match this for your needs. So I think like for an RDM solution to work out, you need to be able to customize it to your needs, and this is like what we want to do with Nomad. So we have this extensive plugin system that allows a Nomad deployment to choose what kind of building blocks you want to put into your deployment. So you might combine a schema and then a parser that fills data into the schema. You might add a node tool to analyze it and an app to search it, but all of this is up to you. And we have already more than 160 plugins developed. And I think like I just want to emphasize that this like every lab has slightly different needs. So uh, you cannot build a fun one fits all kind of solution. So you need to be able to pick these components for your needs. But I also want to emphasize that not everything not should not be customized. So I think one of the big things about fair data is that you should share the schemas in order to make your data fair. So it's fine. I think that your Oasis deployment has a bit of custom app and a node tool to analyze the data. But across Oasises, I think it's we want to push this idea of sharing the schemas, and this is what also a big aspect of what we do in FAIRmat. We develop schemas for different uh, areas of research in material science. So whether it's synthesis or experiments or simulations, we're essentially developing schemas for all of them, and we wanna like share this with the community and essentially want people to adopt these schemas for to make the data fair, so that the data on different OASIS would become more interoperable. Uh, with this said, I want to start out with the raw data. So essentially here we have like an example of what you can do with Nomad. So you can just drop in your files into a project upon which they get sent to the server, and then you have uh, access over like who do you want to share the data with. So you might add reviewers or co-authors to projects that you have created. Um, and essentially we have these kind of abstract containers called projects or uploads that just contain the data that you've sent, files, folders, so on. And you can either drag and drop them using our graphical user interface. You can send them via API calls. And as shown in the video, you can then basically manage the collaborators of this data. So this is basically the first step into the Nomad ecosystem. It's just sending your data and sharing it with people. But this is obviously like just the start of doing research data management. So then you need to go much further. And then I think this next step that you'll encounter is essentially you'll need to think about schemas. And I want to emphasize that this is, I think, what makes Nomad stand out from some other platforms is that we really want to have this extensive support for structured data. So instead of just simply dragging and dropping your files in there, we are all about defining schemas that provide a fixed machine learnable and well-documented structure for your data. And this is all about uh, basically the reusability of your data and interoperability. So essentially you can think of schemas as this kind of blueprint that your data needs to follow. So you might have something like uh, classes that contain different quantities of, for example, string types, or they might have subsections that are repeated, and so on. So this just like defines what your data is supposed to look like. Of course, then you can define, this is like a very small example, but then you can define units to your data. You can define shapes of numeric arrays. You can add descriptions of what these things mean. So this goes very deep into like explaining what your data is about. And once you have a schema defined, you can then connect your actual data to this schema. So, or essentially, what NOMAD does is that when you send some files into the system, we can now extract entries out of it. Let's take an example of you've sent some measurement files. So there might be a NOMAD parser that recognizes this as a measurement and starts creating entries out of this data. And each entry then will be associated with a certain schema. So in this case, we have an entry that is follows this my sample schema as shown here. And now you can see here the correspondence between like the actual data. So there's a name, which was defined as a string here. And then there's also what we call subsection, a substrate subsection, which contains a stack sequence, which is a list of strings. So this is like the really like the core concepts behind Nomad, and what makes us different from just a data hosting platform essentially is that we try to extract entries out of your data which follow schemas. And essentially how this can be done in practice, we have two ways of doing this. So two ways to create these entries. So either it's essentially parsers. And here's an example of a parser at work. So when you drop your data into Nomad, you will see that some of these files will get tagged as entries. So for example, this file was tagged as an entry. And once the processing completes, you can then click on this item, and what you will see is the extracted data from the file. So you can see that it follows a certain structure. So the schema has defined these kind of quantities for the program name and what the calculation is about. In this case, there's some self-consistent iterations inside it. So a parser is essentially just a Python code that gets triggered when a certain file type is recognized. And what it will do is that it will read this file, maybe some auxiliary files that are also in the same folder, and it will extract the information and translate this data into an entry which follows a certain scheme. So parsers are all about completely automating this work of extracting entries out of your raw files and folders. And we have because we have like a big like long history with electronic structure codes. FAIRMat has been developing these parsers for DFT simulations, for example, for already a long while, and we have like lots of expertise with this. But it's not only about simulations. Like I said, it can be about measurements, it can be about samples, it can be about anything that you kind of have a schema for. And the other approach is then ELNs. So also in Nomad, you can then create manually these entries. So this starts out by picking the schema that you're interested in. In this case, we're creating a measurement ELN, and we type in the file name where we want to put it in. And now you can start essentially filling the fields manually here. So now ELNs are about you having a say as a user, so manually inputting certain fields, creating new nested structures, filling in. You might, for example, create connected ELNs. So you might have two ELNs that reference each other. Here's an example shown here about this. So we started up with a measurement, but then also created a sample and connected them to each other. So this is about you having full control over how you, when you're doing the research, for example, how you wanna uh, or what kind of fields you need to fill in as a user. And this is like I would say the kind of orthogonal approach to parsers where you need a human in the process of creating this data. And this is typically work that, for example, might happen in the lab. So the NOMAD ELNs and can essentially be used to replace this kind of just like analog lab notebooks that you might have. So instead of this, you would fill in the data in a NOMAD ELN, which obviously cannot be done typically by an automated procedure, but you need the human to fill these kind of things in. So NOMAD is really covering these two ends of the spectrum. So fully automated parsing, and then human in the process kind of approaches with ELNs. So we want to cover both, because now it depends on different communities have different needs. So like I mentioned, like synthesis, for example, might have you need to be in the lab while you note down these measurements, whereas for a simulation, you basically might just have the input and output files that you can send, and a parser can do all of the work for you. So there's really like different use cases that we want to cover with these two approaches. And the next thing is that, okay, now you've created your entries, they follow some schemas, but how do you find these things now? And this is what apps are about. So they allow you to search through Nomad entries very efficiently. So we in our central deployment we have almost 20 million entries, and there are entries that work with all of this data. So this really scales to huge amounts of data that you might have. These apps are highly customizable to fit specific domains of interest. So in I could mention here that, for example, all of these different filter menus you can customize to your needs, which kind of items you want to show here. Also, we have in the apps these kind of dashboards where you can create interactive plots of the data, for example. So there's a lot of room for customizing these apps to your needs. Once again, because different different like research domains and different schemas need like a different ways to search the data. So I think this is like quite key to efficiently finding the data that you're interested in is through the apps. And as shown here in the video, it's not just about searching finding exactly what you're looking for, but it's also about interactive exploration. So you might like start narrowing down your filtering to get into like an interesting region in your data space, and then find entries that are part of this interesting region. So you can really do this kind of interactive exploration with the apps as well. And the apps essentially have access to any of your schema fields that can be meaningfully indexed. So this means scalar values. So whether it's like individual numbers, individual text fields, and so on, they can all be accessed through the apps and searched. The next thing I want to show you is the remote tools. So we essentially have built this way of providing containerized analysis tools that run kind of alongside your data. And a typical example of this is opening up your data in a Jupyter lab. So we can have a look at it in this video. So imagine you have your files in a project, and then you can directly launch them inside a Jupyter lab to work exactly on on these files that you have uploaded to Nomad. And what this is great is for essentially like doing your analysis, for example, on the data directly on the server. So you can now write, for example, a Jupyter notebook that analyzes your data that you send, writes down the result files, and they are immediately part of your project then. So it's basically the the remote tools have direct access to your data that you have sent already to Nomad, but they can also write back into your projects directly. So this makes it very effective for this kind of remote work on the data. And these tools are containerized. So each tool is basically based on a Docker image. And you can also, in this example, I just showed you the Jupyter Lab running, but this can be any kind of tool that you might want to run. It can be a Python script, but it can also be a full remote desktop, for example, where you have like a specialized graphical user interface installed that your community needs, for example, for analyzing data. So examples of this are for example Fiji or this kind of remote visualization tools. So it's really all about like first of all removing these network bottlenecks that might be present in analyzing large amounts of data. And I think another aspect of this is that it really centralizes the analysis software itself into a single unified location so that not every research group member needs to install this on their own laptop and deal with compilation issues and basically this kind of um, scattering of different like configurations across the different users. So it's all centralized in the one location with a unified config, and this deals with the centralization. And the last thing I want to mention about the kind of building blocks that we have is the Nomad actions. So this is the most recent addition that we've added into Nomad, and these allow you to run predefined and possibly quite complex workflows on your data with customized software and hardware. And here I've given you some examples of what this can mean in practice. So it might be about training a machine learning model on your data that's stored in Nomad, and possibly also then directly storing this trained model into into your Nomad project as well. It might be also about running LLMs to automatically extract data from PDFs and mapping out basically PDF files into schemas that you have installed in your Nomad deployment. We have actually developed already plenty of examples for this within FAIRmat. It could be about running this kind of human in the loop lab automation routines. So you could imagine actions that, for example, start and connect to your laboratory equipment, start some measurement runs, and they report back to you their results, or they might ask for permissions to run experiments, and you as a human then can review what your lab automation is about to do and accept, decline, send further feedback, and so on. So these are really the possibilities are quite endless with this, and that's why I'm personally quite excited about this because I think this can really do quite a lot of work for you within a Nomad deployment that doesn't really fit parsing quite as well, because it's really something that needs to run for a long time. For example, these kind of machine learning model trainings, for example, really need to run for hours or days, and they might need to run on a specialized GPU hardware. So these actions really allow you to run them with a very specific software image and on specific hardware that you have. So typically this is like a GPU where you want to run machine learning inference or training. I think this is a pretty exciting addition that we have already included in the NOMAD system. Now we are building different use cases for this, and there are already quite a lot of examples of this in our plugins that we develop at FAIRmat. Okay, so that was all about the NOMAD ecosystem and getting acquainted with the different building blocks that we have. And I want to wrap up this presentation with showing like some quick tips and resources for how you get started as a NOMAD Oasis administrator. So if you now want to create your own NOMAD deployment, what are the kind of the steps that you could follow? I think it all starts with choosing kind of having some idea of what sort of infrastructure are you now going to run this on. So I think typically there's like a progress where you start out with just your laptop. Basically, the only thing you need is Docker installed, and this runs on Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. So this is typically what people start out with. They have Docker running, and then they uh, boot up one of our templates that we have, and then they have an Oasis running on a laptop, and they can start exploring, adding new plugins, testing out things. But obviously, this is not like a production level setup. So then you typically, once you've explored the kind of setup that you want, explore the features of Nomad, then when you kind of want to go into production, then you'll be wanting to get a dedicated server for your research group, for example. And with one server, one virtual machine, for example, Docker is still a good method there. So you'll basically be able to do that exact same Docker setup that you had on your laptop and just push it into a remote server, and you have it running on your network. And then I think that the last step that you might or might not make in an Oasis setup is that you might want to scale it kind of horizontally using Kubernetes. So if you really have a lot of users, heavy workflows, then a single virtual machine might not do it. So you need to have multiple machines to run your Oasis, and in these kind of multi-node servers, Kubernetes is the correct approach, and we have a dedicated Helm chart for Nomad for just setting this up. And typically, what people do with Oasis is that they might have like an IT department within the institution, and this is kind of their job to set it up, the infrastructure for your Oasis. But you can certainly run also a Nomad Oasis on a cloud, for example, on Amazon Web Services. So this is really up to you and kind of the policies that are present for your research and with your collaborators. I think that this largely depends on where you can and want to run an Oasis. So once you have your infrastructure set up, then you can start thinking about, okay, what does my deployment look like? And this then starts out by basically crafting what we call a distribution. So distribution is a Git repository that defines what your Nomad deployment runs. So it sets up what sort of plugins you have running there, what is the configuration of it, so and what sort of Nomad version you're using there. So it's essentially like just setting up all of the details of how you want to run your deployment, what plugins are there, and it's a Git repository because this makes it easily reproducible. So you have basically version control for different versions of your distribution. And for starting out with this, we provide two different starter templates. So we have one for a production level Oasis. I will share the links in my last slide. And then there's also like a development version, which is then easier when you're just like developing your your distribution locally with a laptop, for example. So these kind of templates that we provide will get you quite easily started with setting up a distribution that you can then deploy on your infrastructure. And once you have your distribution set up, then you can start thinking about, okay, what sort of plugins do I need for my Oasis? And as I mentioned, we have a plugin system in Nomad, which allows you to essentially extend the functionality of your deployment. And plugins are essentially Python packages. So, and each Python package can contain several plugin entry points. And we have different entry point types. We have 8 in total. So there's schemas, like I mentioned, these are the ones that define the data model. Then there's parsers to read your file formats, social normalizers which standardize the parse data. There's apps for the search, actions for these automation workflows. There's APIs to connect completely custom REST endpoints. There's node tools, which I gave you an example of. And then there's also example uploads, which essentially are kind of pre-built set of data that you can very quickly spawn up on your Oasis to take a look at an example set of data to understand, for example, how a certain schema works or so. And these plugins are really like shipped as Python packages and lazy loaded at your deployment startup. And this makes it quite efficient to really distribute these for other people and share all the hard work that you may have done, for example, on a schema or on a parser. And then I think this is all that the Nomad ecosystem is about, sharing your work and sharing your ideas with the community. And we could just very briefly take a look at a plugin example. So plugins are typically also like the distributions, they are Git repository, which contain a Python package, which itself contains Python plugin entry points, which then contain the actual Python code for this parser, for example. So this is a typical kind of a file tree of what a plugin looks like. So you start at the repository root level, and then you have your plugin name, and then this one contains parsers, one of them in here. So then it's typically one Python file that defines what your parser does. And essentially, in order to make it into a Python package, you need to have this kind of pyproject.toml, which defines the dependencies of your Python package and how it gets installed. And of course, then you have licenses and so on. And with this, essentially, once we have a plugin like this can be easily distributed, for example, in the Python package indexed, and then other people can install it with pip quite easily. I want to end my presentation with a few I think lessons that we've learned from the community since we've been running for quite a long while already. And I like here's a few key takeaways I think from the development side. And so I think what we've learned is that schema development takes usually a considerable amount of time and many iterations. So you need to be prepared for this when you're creating a schema for your work. And essentially, you will need to be prepared that the schemas need to be able to evolve. So over time, there will be different versions of the schemas as your work progresses. So it's almost never kind of a one-shot solution. You'll have a perfect schema on the first go, but you need to iterate over it with your users, with the community, and so on. Also, another thing that I want to highlight is that I think data stewards are key for the success of your research data management. So I would highly recommend that you have dedicated people helping out your users, your researchers with the data management. because these data stewards can then create custom plugins for a specific research domain. They can maintain the Oasis and so on, because this obviously takes some effort to set up and to maintain. So I think like a dedicated person there is quite key. And also, like with respect to research data management, I think user experience is one of the things that you need to take seriously, because if you don't make your processes easy enough, they won't get adopted. So often this like ends up like in how you can see this in practice is that if you have a too confusing of an ELN structure, or you need to do too many manual steps to provide your data into NOMAD, users will not be willing to adopt it as eagerly. So you really need to like lower the thresholds of how easily you can get started with the research data management to get nice adoption for it. And also, although we at FAIRMAT are all about fair data, so we want your data to be accessible, we want it you to share it with people, but sometimes you need to have some control over access to your data. So you cannot always immediately share your data. So you may need to keep it embargoed or siloed within a private network, for example, due to collaboration with industry or fear of idea theft. There are certain like things that will make you want to at least withhold your data for a while. And I think this is perfectly fine as long as you in the long term keep in mind that you really what FAIRMAT and NOMAD is all about is sharing your data. So in the end, once you're done, once your embargo periods end, publish the data and release it to other people. So that's a key thing. So basically, this is my last slide. So I want you to go out and try our central deployment. Here are some links. Check out our repository. So we have a GitHub organization. Here are links to our templates for the distribution and for the plugin. And yeah, feel free to join our community. So in Discord, we have already hundreds of members there. So there's quite active discussion there almost daily, and you can visit the FAIRMAT project website at fairmat-nfdi.eu, and there you can get access to tutorials, newsletters, user meetings, and so on. With that, I want to conclude, and I think next we'll be taking a round of questions from the audience.
So thank you very much for your interesting talk. And with that, we say goodbye to the people on YouTube. Our next episode of the NFDI talk is on 22 June, and it has the title SSH Open Marketplace Geistes- und sozialwissenschaftliche Forschungsressourcen einfach zugänglich. So see you soon and goodbye on YouTube.